Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are just going to let people enter the Zoom room and get started in about 30 seconds. Thank you for joining us. All right, we had over 100 people register, and I see quite a few of you already filtering into the Zoom room. It's kind of like we've been doing this for a few years at this point. I think we'll give it 20 more seconds and then we'll get started. All right, Joe, I'm ready to get started. If you're ready, let's do this. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Energy's Natural Gas 101 webinar. My name is Joe Olson. I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement at Fresh Energy, and we have a lot to talk about today. But first, I want to take a few moments to do some housekeeping. We'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, but you can submit them at any time. We'll be using Zoom's Q&A function, so please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I have it set up so you can see each other's questions there. So if you give a thumbs up to questions you like, it will automatically upvote them and move them up the list. So please check out and see what other people on the webinar are submitting and submit your own questions as well. You can use the chat function to message me and Joe, the other presenter, but I would say if you want to guarantee we see your questions, use the Q&A box. Next slide, please. Okay, well, like I said, a ton to cover today. We'll be discussing Fresh Energy and our gas decarbonization work, and then diving into the real meat of the program, Natural Gas 101. And we'll also review some of the ways that you can take action on this issue. And of course, as I said before, we'll dedicate the last 20 minutes or so to Q&A, so submit those questions at any time. Next slide, please. Now, I know some of you are new to Fresh Energy, and thank you for joining us. For 30 years, Fresh Energy has been working on clean energy and climate policy issues here in Minnesota and in the Midwest. And with the urgency of climate change so clear today, it's time to look forward and commit to moving farther and faster to ensure that everyone benefits from the transition to a society powered by climate-friendly energy. Next slide. Now, if the Midwest was its own country, it would be the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. Fresh Energy is using policy change to tackle the root causes of our high emissions. So we're working to get all the coal and gas out of our electric supply, move our fossil fuel dependent transportation system onto clean electric powered vehicles and mobility options, and end our reliance on fossil gas or natural gas for heating our homes and powering our industry. And now this is where the gas decarbonization program comes in. Next slide, please. So in 2021, Fresh Energy launched our groundbreaking gas decarbonization program. It's the first of its kind in the state, and it's going to be pivotal to moving toward a future where buildings and industries are powered by clean electricity instead of fossil gas. You can read the origin story of the program, scan the QR code on your screen, or visit fresh-energy.org/-gas-decarb to learn more. So a goal of Fresh Energy's new gas decarbonization team is to identify and engage in opportunities to more closely scrutinize the gas system in Minnesota. So in addition to engaging in a variety of new gas-related dockets at the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, Fresh Energy's also intervened on the current Centerpoint energy rate case by filing expert testimony on some outdated and untested policies that are contributing to higher gas bills and climate change causing greenhouse gas emissions. We'll talk about that later. Now I'd like to introduce the star of the show, Joe Dammel. Don't be confused, there are two Joes. I am Joe Olson, he is Joe Dammel. We're still fighting it out around who gets what nickname, but Joe's the director of Fresh Energy's gas decarbonization program. And I'd also like to note that he is looking for someone to join the gas decarbonization team. The deadline to apply is March 11th, and you can visit fresh-energy.org and click the link on the homepage banner to see that job description. Next slide, please. Thank you. Joe comes to Fresh Energy as a technical policy expert with deep experience working in gas, energy, and climate-related policy at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Minnesota Attorney General's Office, and at Centerpoint Energy. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Joe for Gas 101.
Thanks, Joe, and good morning, everyone. This is an overview of what I'm going to be covering today, and it's going to be really, really wide-ranging, and we have a really diverse group of people in the audience. So I'll try to present something for everyone, and hopefully you come away learning something. I'm going to start off talking about the gas system and really what is fossil or natural gas. I'm going to talk about some of the big drivers for change. Why do we have a gas decarbonization program at Fresh Energy? Why do we have some new laws and dockets at the Public Utilities Commission? Why are other states, other countries looking at the gas system? We'll look at some of those drivers. Look at some of the policies that are being considered for reforming and transitioning the gas system. Look at some other states that have embarked upon this journey along with Minnesota. And then I'll dive into a rate case example. And that's an on the ground look at how we can apply some of these, overreaching or overarching policy discussion or issues into an actual Public Utilities Commission docket. So let's begin. We'll start with the gas system. What is it? What is natural gas? Let's start there. It's a fossil fuel. It is plants and animals that died and fell to the seafloor millions of years ago. And you can see here on the graphic, there's a schematic of different deposits that natural gas is found in, from the conventional, you see on the left, where you just drill down and there's a pocket of gas there, to shale gas, which is kind of the black band at the bottom. And you can see there's a horizontal drilling there. That's where hydraulic fracturing happens. So the takeaway here is that it's a fossil fuel that's underground. It's primarily methane with some other liquids, hydrocarbon liquids, carbon dioxide, water vapor included in it as well. And what do we call it? It's been called many things over the years. You probably know it most well as natural gas. But we like to use the term fossil gas or methane gas. I think that's more indicative of what it actually is. Some people call it fracked gas. And then if you dig back into the history of natural gas, or what people call it, it's interesting. It's been called everything from buried sunshine to inflammable air. And that I think just speaks to the really rich history of how we use this fossil fuel, both in the kind of the cultural public domain and also in our buildings and in our processes. So that's gas. That's where it comes from. I'm going to talk next about how we measure it, because I think this is something that's a little bit difficult to wrap your head around, because we use so many different terms to quantify it and talk about it. There's energy-based terms. So that's a therm or a decatherm, and a decatherm is 10 therms. There's British thermal units, or BTUs. So if you think about a heater or a furnace with a BTU rating, that's rating the energy capacity of that piece of equipment, and that's how gas is measured too. But gas is also a gas, and it exists in volume, and that is often measured in cubic feet or 1,000 cubic feet. There's a conversion or a little cheat sheet here at the bottom that guides you through what a dollar per therm all the way through 1,000 cubic feet would be. So these are kind of the most common ways that we see gas expressed as a price. So just remember that they're all related, and you can go back to the recording of this webinar and take a look at this cheat sheet if you ever have a question about what's on your bill. Let's take a look at what's on your bill. this is my bill from my old house from last February. So remember, that was a really cold event, and the price spike happened then. It doesn't display in the bill itself, but this is kind of that time period. So it's about a year ago. If you look at your bill, there's a cost of gas line item. And so you can see here, that month I used 160 therms, and it cost me 46 cents per therm. This represents two components of gas delivery, and we're going to talk a little bit more about delivery in the next few slides. But gas utilities that you know of, like Centerpoint or Xcel or Minnesota Energy Resources Corporation, have two main jobs. That's to buy gas and to transport it to the distribution system. And the cost of gas that you see on your bill is really a component of the cost it takes to transport that gas and the cost it takes to purchase that gas. So this is a 46 cents per therm line item in your bill. It'll change based on adjustments that are made every month to that price in your purchase gas adjustment. It's a pass-through cost from utilities. And you can see here, another thing to look at is, you know, the cost of gas made up about 60% of my bill last winter. So $73 out of the $124 of my bill. So that also fluctuates based on your usage, because there's some fixed charges that are current in your bill as well. But that's just an idea to give you a sense of how much the cost of gas makes up your bill. And it's always fun, at least for me, to take a look at utility bills and see you know what's in them. Okay, we're going to zoom out and take a look at the system itself. And what I've been talking about to this point, like on your bill, is your natural gas company. So here's a list of the investor-owned utilities operating in Minnesota. And you can see here by the red box that this is really only capturing a really small part of the gas system itself. So it starts off in the oil and gas wells, and we remember, you know, the different deposits underground where gas is produced. So it's captured in the well, it's separated, oil and water is separated, it's processed in a plant, and then it's injected into the transportation, interstate transmission lines, and ultimately delivered to your local gas delivery company. And then they deliver that gas to you. So this is, from a really high level, what we're talking about when we talk about the gas system. I'm going to zoom in right now to the oil and gas production wells. So where does this happen? We're in Minnesota, and I think the takeaway from this this graph, or this map, which shows conventional fields, is that Minnesota has no fossil gas resources. We're kind of the donut hole in the donut of gas that surrounds us. And you know, I think that yeah, it's just something to remember, that we're really importing all of the fossil gas that we use. This is where it comes from. I'm not showing the shale deposits, but they're generally in similar places. The Appalachian Basin is where the Marcellus shale play is. There's shale plays in Texas as well. And a play is just really an area where shale gas, or gas located in shale, is located. And that's where hydraulic fracturing, the technology, comes into play to reach that, again, the harder to reach areas where the shale gas is found. So this is just to give you an idea and to make the point that Minnesota has no fossil resources of our own. So that's where the gas comes from. How does it get from the production area to the end user, to the local distribution companies? Here's the patchwork of interstate and intrastate pipelines. The blue line are interstate pipelines. They're regulated by FERC, and they, as the name suggests, go from state to state, delivering gas. And you can see the system of pipes that leads to Minnesota. I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit. And you can see here kind of where we get our gas in Minnesota. There's gas from Canada, gas from southern US. There's some storage fields, I think, in Michigan. And so this is the network of gas pipelines that delivers gas to Minnesota and to our end users like me and you. So it's a really broad overview of the gas system. I'm going to talk now about some of the drivers for change and why we have a gas decarbonization program at Fresh Energy. And I'm going to talk about climate, health, impacts, infrastructure spending, and rates. And then I'll talk a little bit more about gas costs. So let's start with climate impacts. And this comes on the heels of this week of the IPCC report for policymakers, which just underscores the urgency of acting on to address climate change in even more dire terms than we've seen. So it's a really sobering time to think about the climate impacts of our energy systems. This graph right here shows Minnesota gas consumption using data from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and it shows the consumption in the commercial, industrial, and residential sectors from 2005 through 2018, when the most recent data is available. And you can see the trend line that the use of fossil gas in Minnesota is increasing. And that poses a concern because of the climate impact of the gas system across the US. Industry and commercial and residential buildings using fossil gas contribute approximately 35% of the country's greenhouse gas emissions. And so in Minnesota, if you look at the trend of natural gas usage, in order to meet our state's own greenhouse gas emissions reductions and meet the overall climate imperative, we need to address emissions from this sector. We're making a lot of progress on the transportation and the electric sectors. There's a lot of work to do in those sectors for sure, but we're making progress. But we really need to start making some progress in this sector as well if we want to meet those targets that we have in state law. So that's a snapshot of the trends in Minnesota. Another climate impact that we are learning more and more about is the impact of methane emissions from the gas system. And that's across the supply chain, from the production, the transmission, and the delivery of fossil gas. We're also learning a lot more about what happens kind of beyond the meter at the appliance level and within buildings, and understanding that it's a lot more methane is leaking than we had assumed, that we had understood previously beyond the meter. So there's opportunities at every step of the process to address methane emissions, and it's a much more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So this just highlights the system-wide impacts of the gas system. Those are climate impacts. I'm going to talk a little bit about health impacts and give a shout out to RMI, which is a policy-based kind of think tank that looks at energy and climate policy. They have a really great report on decarbonizing homes, which you can see following the link here, and that a lot of their work focuses on the health impacts of using gas appliances in homes. This chart is probably a little bit difficult to read, but I think it is something that I revisit to just absorb the number of different health impacts that different gas appliances can have in your home. And so, there's a growing understanding of the health impacts of gas use in homes as well. So a lot of important research going on the climate and the health fronts, and I want to highlight that. Talked about the climate impacts, talked about the health impacts. I want to talk about infrastructure spending. And this is from across the country. You can see that starting in about 2010, 2011, gas utilities started spending a lot more on infrastructure. There are a number of reasons for this, but there's health and safety regulations, or primarily safety regulations, that gas utilities have been addressing. And there's also just really old leaky pipe systems in parts of the country that utilities have started to replace in an accelerated manner than historical levels. And the reason this matters for gas utility customers is that as infrastructure is added to rate base, which is a regulatory concept, it basically means utility property that is recovered over a period of time, that increases the rates on that consumers face. So as gas utilities spend more, the rate impact increases. And this is especially concerning when you're looking at the energy burden and how much money a household spends on energy. So there's I think going to be a really interesting discussion about infrastructure spending. We think it's important to have a safe and reliable system, but I think there's some discussion to be had about how do we use energy and how do we invest money, a finite amount of money, into our energy system in the future. So I'll talk about that when I talk about the rate case example at the end. I want to talk a little bit more about costs, though. So you saw my bill from last winter, the price per therm, and you probably heard going into this winter a lot of discussion about higher gas bills. And I think that we've really seen that bear out. It might not have been as severe as we and some people initially predicted, but it's still really, really concerning and having an impact on our pocketbooks. So back last fall, going into the winter, the U.S. Energy Information Administration did a survey or an outlook of the winter, and they predicted an increase for Midwestern customers' gas bills. And that had to do with these interrelated factors that are listed below. So there's flat gas production. So that's the supply is flat. The global market, and we can talk a little bit about that in the future as well. But the global market driving exports of US gas into the international market. So that's the demand issue. The storage inventory was low going into winter, and in order to increase the storage, that puts an upward pressure again on the gas prices. That's a supply issue. There's a slightly colder forecast for the US in terms of the weather, and a colder forecast means people use more gas. And then just the underlying possibility of price volatility and price spikes. I'm going to talk a little bit about that next. So this is a graph from Henry Hub, which is a pricing hub. There's, I think, a couple hundred pricing hubs across the country where it's basically a trading point on the gas system where a price is set. Henry Hub is maybe the most famous location or a hub for gas prices. So you'll often see it in the news as kind of a reference point. And a few things to take away from this graph. One is just the volatility that we saw in the early 2000s and the price spikes that happened then. This was a time kind of before the shale and the fracking revolution happened, and a lot of places, a lot of ports in the U.S. were talking about importing liquefied natural gas from overseas in order to address the supply problem in the U.S. So that resulted in price volatility. We know we had an influx of supply from hydraulic fracturing starting in about 2010. And you can see the impact that had in lowering and reducing the volatility of the gas market for about the next decade. And if you recall the earlier chart that showed utility infrastructure spending, that occurred at the same time. And some gas executives have said that it was the kind of a silver lining of having really low gas prices is that they could increase the infrastructure spending on the system without as much of an impact on rates as otherwise would have showed up in customers' bills. But we can see here the last thing on this graph is the February 2021 price spike, which is currently under investigation at the Public Utilities Commission here in Minnesota. And I think there's some indication across the kind of the gas market world that this period of relative stability in the market may be coming to an end, and that's going to again increase the energy burden on folks due to the price of their gas bills. One more slide on gas prices and trends. And so this is a graph showing 12 months of a year for the past 10 years. The blue line, which is at the very top, and the highest line is 2021. And I think this shows a few things. One, it shows the seasonal nature of gas prices, and that has to do with a number of things, but refilling storage, gas storage, production, demand. And you can see here that in 2021, the price delivered to residential customers was higher than the historical past 9 years or past 10 years. And so we're going to be monitoring this trend into the future, and want to just make one note that one question that we've seen arising in recent days is the potential impact of the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine on gas prices. And first, I just want to acknowledge that it is a humanitarian crisis, and I think our energy and focus should be on just that aspect of it. Second, the gas market in the U.S. is undoubtedly a part of the international marketplace, and volatility will have ripple effects in the domestic gas market. And I think maybe the takeaway at this point is really, regardless of the cause of volatility, this feature, the volatility in the gas market, will be an important factor in the policies that we begin to consider in the future of gas. And so I think this is a good opportunity to transition into talking about some of those policies that really address the gas system from a policy perspective. Let's do that. Over the past few years, there's been an influx of studies on the future of gas. What does it mean? How from a regulatory perspective can we address this? And so this is a report by the Regulatory Assistance Project, which has partnered with the Minnesota PUC and other proceedings. And I think they're a really great resource for just trying to figure out how do we address the system like the gas system. So these are their top line recommendations. Lead with equity. I want to talk a little bit about that. It's a really important part of the work that Fresh Energy does and the lens through which we view this issue. I talked a lot about the energy burden and the impact of people's gas bills on their budget. And one of the things that we want to avoid and focus on is making sure that that a transition from how we do business on the gas side is really leading with equity and leading with policies that will help communities transition, provide services like energy efficiency, and then make sure that rates are affordable for folks going forward. So it's going to be a really difficult balance to strike, but a really, really important one as well as we consider these regulatory policies. And I think one of the one element that will make this a successful discussion is to get as many folks as possible at the table to really provide input to the Public Utilities Commission into the discussion about how do we do this and how do we address really real concerns that folks have about making a transition and making sure that policies are built really thoughtfully and to reduce inequity rather than increase it. The next bullet point is gas utility planning and getting an understanding of both how gas utilities acquire gas resources. That's important for the reasons we saw before. It's a main feature of the price spike investigation, is understanding how a gas utility procures gas, especially in times of stress on the system. But it's also a question of how do you plan your distribution system investments? And that's a kind of a new thing for gas utilities to really focus on from a regulatory perspective. We do it on the electric side, both with integrated resource planning for electric utilities and on integrated distribution planning for electric utilities. And I think that there are lessons to be learned from those programs that we can apply in a common sense way for gas utilities. The other bullet that we definitely support is energy efficiency and electrification. That conserving energy, making homes and buildings more energy efficient, really addressing the building envelope itself is kind of a no-lose proposition. Using less energy saves people money, and it also really unlocks the opportunity for a lot of the electrification resources. So things like heat pumps, like anything, work better when the building that they're installed in is more efficient. So efficiency and electrification are really important aspects of the future of gas. And then performing gas rate making, and that's really understanding, and I'm going to talk a little bit about rate cases at the very end, but understanding the business model of gas utilities, how they set rates, and kind of what the incentives are for a gas utility to operate. And it's something that has been a really rich area in the electric side again, but I think the time for the gas utility focus is coming, and it in many ways it's here. So that's a really quick overview of one report. Here's another report from, again, RMI, the Rocky Mountain Institute, and they have a lot of the same recommendations for areas to focus on. And I think they're, again, a really great resource. California, it's no surprise that they're really concerned about how do you transition the gas system. They have, pretty robust regulatory process that looks at these. And here's some of the framework details that came out about a year ago. And then we're also talking about this in Minnesota. So the Natural Gas Innovation Act was passed last session, so last spring in 2021. And I'll talk a little bit about that. This NGIA, as we call it, does a few things. One, it allows for gas utilities to file NGIA plans, which include a number of resources that utilities are going to be implementing in order to achieve both greenhouse gas emissions reductions and also to reduce the throughput, or how much fossil gas is being run through this distribution system. So there's a greenhouse gas and a throughput reduction goals for gas utilities. The types of resources we're talking about are electrification and efficiency, but also things like hydrogen and renewable natural gas. So it's just really a portfolio of different resources that the commission will consider and the gas utilities will propose. Right now, we're creating regulatory frameworks, and that's in docket 21-566. We're in the middle of comments right now, and we expect that the commission will approve frameworks. They have to under NGIA by June 1. And then the second docket is the future of gas docket, and that's really what we're, and I think a really great opportunity to talk about these really big picture issues at the commission. That docket is open, and we expect that activity will begin hopefully later this year. So that's what's happening in Minnesota. I'm going to go quickly just through, and I'm not going to really describe these, but just to note that other states are also embarking upon future of gas dockets. So California, no surprise there. Colorado, I think in a lot of ways is similar to Minnesota in terms of where it's at and thinking about the future of gas. And they have a clean heat standard, which I think is similar to NGIA. So it's interesting to watch that development in Colorado. Washington State also has a docket open, and there are about a half dozen other states that have future of gas dockets open as well. So how do we, as Fresh Energy, approach this? One, I just talked about the opportunities at the PUC in terms of the NGIA dockets. I'm going to talk next about utility rate case, where we've been involved in driving some of these issues for utility. Looking at resource and distribution planning, again, I mentioned that earlier. Looking at expansions and incentives. I want to talk about that in the rate case context. And we also want to protect ratepayers and, again, center equity. So making sure that the right folks are at the table, and also that we're designing policies that are going to decrease inequity and protect ratepayers and in the face of increasing gas rates. And I'm a former, as Joe mentioned, a former consumer advocate at the Minnesota Attorney General's office, and I think the mentality that I had there is something I'll never really lose. And so the good thing is that consumer issues, ratepayer issues, and some of these future of gas concepts are really, really in harmony. So I'm looking forward to bring that perspective to the work that Fresh Energy does as well. So I want to spend a few minutes now talking about a rate case example, how these future of gas policies are enacted at a more granular, maybe some would even say boring level, and that's in the utility rate case. We have a blog about what a rate case is that's available on our website, and I'm biased, but I think it's a pretty good overview of what a utility rate case is. I want to try to boil it down even further into an analogy about pies. So I think at a very large, very high level, a rate case is about pie, and it's about two aspects of pie. I really like pie, but one is the size of the pie. So a utility will have a revenue requirement, which is how much revenue it needs to run its business and to provide its shareholders with a return that's reasonable under Supreme Court precedent and state PUC precedent. And so that all gets boiled into the revenue requirement, and interveners in the rate case proceeding will argue and recommend a smaller size of the pie. And so the commission decides how big the pie is. The commission also decides amongst customer classes how big of a slice each customer class gets. So residential customers are very different than industrial customers, and they have different rates as a result. And so as a customer class, the commission has the task to decide what the appropriate size or portion of each slice is for each customer class. And that's how rates are set. And in a very broad level, that's how rates are set. Rate case proceedings are primarily about setting rates, but within that, there are really good opportunities to address utility operations that affect the future of gas. And I'm going to talk about three of those right now. So in Centerpoint's rate case that was filed in November, we filed testimony that touched upon three aspects of the future of gas, and that's the expansion of the gas system, the replacement of the gas system, and then the future of the gas system. I'm going to talk about each of those briefly now. First, expansion. So this is, if you ever wondered how a gas utility grows, this is it. It's by using extension allowances. And really briefly, you can see the graph here it's from an RMI report. If you're a new customer, a potential new customer of a gas utility, the you get an allowance or a monetary amount for a certain number of feet of both gas main extension, so that's the bigger pipe going down the road, and then for gas service extension and the meter. So as long as you're close enough to the main, and in this case, Centerpoint's existing free footage is 150 feet. So as long as you're within 150 feet of the main, you'll get the main extended for free. And then as long as you're within 75 feet of the main to the meter, you'll get that service line put in for free. And the rationale is that the new customers will provide benefits to the system that outweigh the costs to all customers over time, that outweigh the cost to add that customer. And it makes sense in a world where you want to provide gas service to as many people as possible. And that's something that states have, has been a part of state policy and has resulted in these line extension allowance policies, across the country. Centerpoint spends approximately $20 million a year on these line extensions. And, we think it's time to rethink those as we think about the future of the gas system. State law and state policy has evolved that in such a way that there's now a policy to reduce the throughput through the gas system. And if there is a broader transition away from using the gas system like we do today, there's a risk that the new infrastructure that's built will be stranded and left over and unusable, but the utility will still be entitled under the current rate making structure to recover those assets. So it's called a stranded asset. So the more we build out the system to supply new customers, the greater that risk of the stranded asset becomes. So we recommend a reduction to the allowance amount in the rate case. I'll quickly talk about infrastructure replacement. So Centerpoint, this is a Centerpoint annual spending on their distribution system from the early 2000s kind of into the future. And you can see again, it coincides with other utilities across the country and the increase in their distribution spending. It's replacing cast iron main, bare steel main, some leaky plastic pipe, and it's having an impact on rates as we've seen across other parts of the country as well. So we're recommending that the commission really address this issue because it's happening in every utility in the state. We're asking that the commission address this issue in the future of gas docket, so we can really have a discussion, not solely focused on safety, but also on, what are other alternatives we can consider rather than replacing an old pipe network. Is there an opportunity, for example, to electrify that part of the distribution system? And would that be cheaper? Would that be more beneficial in the future? Things like that are things that we hope to start the discussion on in the very near future in that future of gas docket. So we called that out in the rate case. The last component is innovation. That Centerpoint in this case filed a proposal containing 2 hydrogen projects, and what they would do is use electricity from renewable energy sources. In this case, it's Xcel Energy's Renewable Connect tariff, and use electricity and an electrolyzer to transform water into hydrogen. And hydrogen can then be blended into the system and then burned similar to fossil gas. There's a lot of issues involved in this. Our main point is that the commission, as I said before, is going to consider NGIA plans, which include hydrogen, in the very near future that utilities propose. We're building the regulatory framework to consider those projects right now. And Centerpoint is a part of those discussions, and in many ways is providing a lot of really helpful input on how do we build those frameworks. So our direct testimony recommended that the commission consider those in that NGIA process, because we really want to compare these innovative resources against one another to make sure that the money that we're spending, the ratepayer money that we're spending, the customer money we're spending, it is being spent in the best way and on projects that really represent the best and highest use cases for each technology. So for hydrogen, for example, there's a lot to learn about how much we can put on the system before we need to start replacing pipe components, replacing end use components. There may be a better use for that, and that we think would exist in a co-location, for example, and an industrial process that may be hard to electrify. A lot to explore, and we just think that the best place to do that is in this new regulatory process that the Commission is working on creating. So that's an overview of how we apply future of gas concepts to kind of a traditional rate-making regulatory process. And it's, I think, a really exciting area, which is why I'm working in it, because I find it endlessly fascinating, and I hope you do too as well. And there's a lot of things that you can do as a customer to help us lead the charge on gas decarbonization. Individual customer choices are really driving market innovation and sending a signal to utilities that we demand, a transition to cleaner uses of energy. So you can help weigh in on key regulatory proceedings that your utilities are undergoing. For example, Centerpoint's rate case is now open for public comment until April 11th, and you can weigh in to the Commission about some of the issues that I talked about. You can find more information on our website, which is located there, and how to do that. So we look forward to additional engagement with utilities, and I'm looking forward to discussion in the Q&A. So I'll pass it back to Joe.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you everyone for joining us. I've seen a few questions come in, and I just want to first say, Joe, that your analogies always make me hungry. I think the moment you started talking about pie, I started thinking about lunch and how maybe, like, I don't know, pies could stand alone as its own lunch, but that's for me to deal with later. But thank you for that, Joe. And we've had a few questions come in. But first, I want to, you like mentioned this a little bit, but can you give a little bit of just some background on how gas utilities to this point, when compared to electric utilities, have been kind of a black box? Like, we haven't been able to see, or the public hasn't been able to see into some of the processes and how the decisions are made. Is there anything you want to say just about that? Maybe like a quick summary if folks on the call are trying to like explain it to their coworkers or friends who couldn't be here today.
Yeah, sure. I think we, starting with the electric side, we've been talking about integrated resource planning and grid modernization, and how do we get the grid cleaner for many years, and Fresh Energy has been a part of that from the beginning. And on the gas side, I think we're just now starting to have these conversations. So, and that's due to the reasons I talked about in the presentation. Part of it is the impact that multiple rate cases or rate riders have had on rates, and a lot of that's driven by the capital spending for accelerated system replacement that we've seen, and that I talked about. And so that that with the climate crisis and health impacts, everything I talked about is really what's driving this discussion. But I do remember sitting with a colleague at the AG's office. We were in the middle of talking about electric grid modernization efforts, and it was really exciting, and it still really is. But we just had the thought, like, man, sometime soon we're going to have to address gas utilities and figure out what's going on there. I didn't think it would be so soon, but I think it's really important now that we're turning our attention to it and really trying to figure out what can we apply from our lessons learned in the electric side, and in what instances do we need to really think outside of the box for solutions and regulatory solutions that are tailored to the gas system, because they are not they're not alike, and we're going to have to really think carefully about how we implement policies.
Thank you, Joe. And now I want to dive into a question that William sent through the Q&A, and this is kind of on the consumer side. So how close or far, he says, are we from being able to rely on air source heat pumps for 100% of one's heating needs in Minnesota? And I know Minnesota always gets called out, we're like a cold weather state, and we have an opportunity to set the pace for other states in the Midwest. But can you speak a little bit about where we are for full reliance on heat pumps?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question. And yeah, and again, Joe, I thanks for bringing up that Minnesota really is one of the toughest use cases for a lot of this work in energy transition. I know we have a blog post on heat pumps, that kind of explainer that goes into the technology and where the state of the technology is. We've also been a part of a report that looked at decarbonization pathways for Minnesota, and maybe we can find that as well. It's basically, it modeled a full electrification scenario that would get us to 100% electrification by 2050. Modeled that against electrification with gas backup pathway, and then also a high renewable gas pathway. There's a lot that we need to learn about how to get to 100% electrification. And I think we're going to start doing that in NGIA plan. So as utilities file proposals for electrification, we can learn and try to see how to make this scalable, find out what the barriers are. And I think as we electrify other sectors of our economy, including transportation, we're going to have to think about how we can accommodate different uses of electricity in our homes, from the panel upgrades, things like that. And I think the other thing, just to underscore again, is the importance of energy efficiency in any pathway we choose. Again, I said it was a no-lose alternative, and the pathway study that I mentioned, every scenario had about a 30% reduction in building energy use from energy efficiency. So the more efficient a home is, the easier it is. It's going to be to integrate electrification and uses. But how we get there, how specifically we get there, I think it's still something that we're really probing and at the early stages of it. And there's been a lot of work that kind of sets it up at a high level. And I think now we're getting ready to dig into how do we do this on the ground.
Thanks, Joe. So I've got another question from Gary that came in through the chat. Gary asks, is it better to let waste methane float into the atmosphere or burn/flare it at the drilling site? And I know you had a picture of that in your presentation. Mm-hmm. Do you also have an opinion?
I think addressing greenhouse gas emissions on the production side, I'm not an expert in that. I think a lot of it will have to deal with the site itself. But I do know that on the production end, the release of methane is one of the significant contributors to methane emissions along that supply chain. But I'm sure other folks have done some research into looking at kind of the specifics of how you can quantify the greenhouse gas emissions from the production side of it.
Thanks, Joe. I've got another one, this one coming from Dana. And Dana says, Well, switching from gas to electricity is a great long-term strategy. I'd like to learn about some credible carbon offset strategies for the use of natural gas. Now, is this something, Joe, that you're aware of? Has there been a lot of thought in this area?
Yeah, I have I think a few responses to that. I'm not sure if it's if the questioner means offsets like kind of in your day-to-day use of carbon, or if they're carbon offsets in terms of uh, a form of credits that you can purchase to offset your carbon emissions. Um, Certainly, one of the discussions that we're having at the commission, especially on technologies like renewable natural gas, is how do you account for and verify the carbon emissions related to that technology. I think we're still in the early days of figuring out what type of.
Oh, Joe, you froze for me right before what I imagine would have been a very good answer. Well, gosh, I think since we are coming up on time and your screen is frozen and I don't see you popping back in, I think we are going to bring this
Resources.
meeting. Oh, there you are. You're back.
Oh, I'm
Hi,
back.
Joe. Oh, no, you're freezing again. This is so 2020, not 2022.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I was going on and on.
I told them all you had like the solution, and that's
Yeah,
the reason that you know, you were cut off.
yeah. So I think my main point was, you know, looking at a credit system for things like renewable natural gas is something that's going to be developing, and we're tracking very closely. Um, and I think part of the question might have been, what can you do now to reduce your your the carbon intensity of gas use? And I think that really is exploring electrification. I know that it's not always easy to, for example, um, get an electric water heater, just because I think there's work to be done on the contractor side and just on the public education side of it that we're interested in, to make sure that those are stocked and folks have a choice. I know when your hot water goes out, you don't always have a choice, or you have a choice between getting it hot water today from a gas replacement, or getting it in a few weeks when the electric version comes in. So I think there's work to be done on the consumer choice part of it, um, and also utilizing some existing like Home Energy Squad or conservation improvement program opportunities to get your house or your living space more energy efficient, and also making sure that you have a conversation about the any electric panel needs you might require, building that into a plan to really transition, so that if the time comes when you do need a new AC, you can maybe replace that with an air source heat pump, a new furnace, air source heat pump. Um, and I think just the planning, it's going to take a little bit more work on the front end to really be uh, able to make a transition in your own home. But I think we're understanding more and more of the benefits of doing that, and also some of the barriers to doing that as well. So having a good plan and being ready to electrify, I think, is one really great step you can take today.
Thanks, Joe. And let's just do one final question, kind of a probably pretty quick answer. Given the IPCC report that came out yesterday, former Minnesota State Representative Jean Wagenius has submitted our final question. So Jean asks, how does your timeline for change fit with what the science tells us we need to do? And especially relevant question given yesterday's report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think every report that comes out just underscores the urgency of action. And I think, the work that I do is primarily in the regulatory space, and we want to move as fast as possible to make that transition. understanding that it may take some time to really implement some of the policies that we're talking about in this regulatory sphere. I think there are other ways that we can be engaged as a society to again, like look at electrification options, making those more available. I think the market development is going to increase for a lot of these appliances. And so in some ways, it would be great if the market would be faster than the regulatory system, but we're working as fast as possible and making some really great strides on the regulatory front. Yeah, that's all I can say is we're working very hard to make the transition in light of the urgency of the climate crisis.
Thank you, Joe. And I would add to education is just so key. Most folks don't understand the gas system here in Minnesota that we rely on currently. So please, folks on the call, spread the word about this webinar. I'll be sending you a link to the recording after. And I guess with that, we are at time. And I think I need to track down some pie for lunch. So thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great afternoon and stay tuned for that follow-up email that'll be coming to your inbox from Joe Dammel. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.